I'm Stacey Clayton, Regional Relations Director, and your hosts for this evening are Wayne State's Division of University Relations, the Black Faculty Staff Association, the Juneteenth Planning Committee, represented by Dr. Donna Paget. Is she in the room? We also have the Courageous Conversation Consortium, represented by School of Social Work named Cheryl Kubiak. Wayne State's Board of Governors Chair Brian C. Barnhill II will give remarks after the singing of the Black National Anthem by Ms. Tiara Clayton. Will you please stand?
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as a rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us, and sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day. Let us march on till victory is won. God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us far along the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forgot thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
And in case you missed that last name, that's my big sister. Thank you so much, Tiara. Now we will hear from our Wayne State Board of Governors Chair, Mr. Brian Barnhill.
All right, good evening. Good evening. On behalf of the Wayne State University Board of Governors, it is truly my pleasure to welcome everyone to this evening's event. I also want to extend a special thank you to our partners in Wayne State University Relations, the Courageous Conversations Consortium, the Juneteenth Planning Committee, and the Black Faculty and Staff Association for bringing this powerful gathering together. Many of you know this year marks the 100th anniversary of Black History Month. It's a milestone that invites us not only to remember history, but to also reconsider how it is told, who is centered, and whose contributions have too often been overlooked. That reflection is especially meaningful here at Wayne State. As Detroit's premier public urban research university, Wayne State is inseparable from the city that we call home. Our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and neighbors are all deeply rooted in Detroit's history. And that history is undeniably Black history. It's a history shaped by resilience, leadership, creativity, and community, often led by individuals whose names did not make it into the textbooks that impacted and have shaped current generations. Tonight's conversation reflects that truth. So by lifting up the stories of mothers, mentors, and Black women whose wisdom and courage helped shape some of the most influential voices in American history, and by connecting those stories to Detroit, this program reminds us that legacy is not a footnote, it's foundational. It's also why hosting this observance on a college campus matters. Universities are still today and have long been places where ideas are examined, where narratives are challenged, and new understanding takes root. When we create space for these courageous conversations, we affirm our responsibility to educate, to engage honestly with history and its ongoing influence in our world. So, thank you all again for joining us and for being part of a conversation that honors the past while also helping shape a more informed and inclusive future. Thank you very much. See, I thought I was going to have the pleasure of introducing the next person, but you know what? I'll let our host do that.
Thank you, Chair Barnhill, very much. And as the chair said, this year marks the 100th anniversary of recognizing Black history. Here to give us the history of Black history is Ken Coleman. Ken is an author journalist who writes about Southeast Michigan history and civil rights. He's a former Michigan Chronicle senior editor and served as the American Black Journal segment host on Detroit Public Television. He has written and published 4 books on Black life in Detroit. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Ken Coleman.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Stacy, you know, when I get an opportunity, like I think most of you, when I get an opportunity to share, it's almost like a this is your life moment. Stacy and I worked on Detroit City Council staffs too many years ago, Stacy. We still look young though. But it's always great to see her. When Stacy and I talked about this opportunity to share just a few brief moments, because the reason why we're here, I'm not the reason why we're here, but I'm happy to be on the program. 2 points of personal privilege before I get into Detroit's history, and having Detroit's history being Detroit's Black history. Brian Barnhill, Chair Brian Barnhill, but I was fortunate enough when I worked for Detroit Public Schools more than 20 years ago. One of the programs that I managed, Chair Barney, you'll remember, in my portfolio for Detroit Public Schools, was helping to manage the Detroit Citywide Student Council. He is the chair today of the Wayne State University Board of Governors, but I remember him, and he was always bright. I remember him when he was a high school student, high school senior, Renaissance High School. So I'm so proud to see his ascension. And so I wanted to point that out personally. I want to point that out for the record publicly. I'm so proud of Brian and the work that he does. One other personal note, a good friend of our family. She's a mentor to me and my wife, Kim Trent, who was a former Wayne State Board of Governors. It is my good friend, Donna Givens-Davidson. She is in her hand. She will be on stage momentarily. But she has been a great mentor to me and Kim, my wife, and our son, Jackson Coleman. When I was asked to help be part of this program, Stacy said, I read the piece that you and Jackson wrote earlier this month about Black History, Negro History Week, and then transition to Black History Month. We wanted to, the idea was that me and Jackson would stand here and talk very briefly about the piece that we wrote and the research that Jackson did largely. Jackson is 17 now, and it is a day that I'm very proud of him, but I'm very nervous. Jackson passed his driver's training test today. He is a legal Michigan driver, but he's also a member of the Midnight Golf organization cohort. He is meeting at this hour about a mile from me. He's driving on his own, and those of you who have children know what I'm going through. Very proud of him, but I'm really nervous. Anyway, I wanted to point out, and lots of great friends here, just very briefly on Detroit history. This is a university that Kim and I both attended. This is a university that has had great people who chronicle Black life in Detroit. People far smarter and more apt to research and write about history. I think about people like Herb Boyd, and many of you know Herb. Herb is at Wayne State University graduate, another mentor. I've been fortunate enough to chronicle Black life in Detroit for more than 35 years. Done it for an honor and privilege to do it for organizations like the Michigan Chronicle. My work has been published in many different places. And when I thought about this program today, and obviously being held on Black History Month, I think about an African-American man who wasn't from Detroit, but spent a lot of time here in the 1930s and 40s. And that's Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Brought ahead, I know you work very well, and I wanted to point out what a lot of us know, but maybe perhaps share with others. In a very real sense, Black History Month turns 100 this year. And that is because 100 years ago, in 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the learned historian, a son of slaves, founded Negro History Month in February of 1926. Many of you know the story that the reason for the period in the year was the birthdays of two great Americans, Frederick Douglass, the African-American abolitionist, and former U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. It was Dr. Woodson's thought to create a week at that time to honor their work and to help lift up perpetuity the work that we would do in successive years. I can't say anymore. I don't have words to say how important that is. And if we could all just lift up in a round of applause the work that Dr. Coverdie was. Just a few brief words, because my time is short. I do want to point out that what's interesting about the 1920s, 1926, is that Detroit was certainly experiencing a tremendous growth in the number of African American men and women who were coming here to the Motor City, many of them from the South. Consider this, in 1910, Detroit's Black population was only about 5,700 people. In 1910, Detroit's Black population was only about 5,700 people. It skyrocketed exponentially. 30 years later, more than 120,000 African Americans moved to Detroit. My history is probably no different than many of yours here in the audience. My mom's family hails from the Jackson, Mississippi area, Carthage, Mississippi, to be specific. My mom's family comes here in the 1940s after my grandfather served in the Second World War. Proud of his service, proud that he was part of the Normandy experience in 1944, the era of the period of time that we come to know as D-Day. My dad's family, so my mom's family comes here from Mississippi. My dad's family comes here from Talladega, Alabama. My father's parents are about 10 years older than my mother's parents. So my dad's folk came here earlier. How many people know the great history of, not too far from here, Detroit's North End? Right? So my dad's family, my grandparents were married at a church that doesn't exist anymore, but was in the North End. We see this tremendous expansion of the African American community in Detroit in the 30s and 40s. Dr. Coverdie, while he was not from here, was here often, particularly during Negro History Week, almost every other year, bringing the word at Second Baptist Church, Michigan's oldest African American congregation. He spoke here often in the 1930s. And when he wasn't speaking at Second Baptist Church, that was founded by 13 African Americans in 1836, 1 year before Michigan was part of the Union. It was still a territory at that time. Second Baptist Church, he ended up speaking there often. One of the other first African American congregations was Bethel A&E Church. Many people are familiar with Bethel A&E. You may be members. He spoke at both churches and other spaces within the city. I think it's important to look at this context as we think about the 100th anniversary of Black History Month and really be proud of the fact that Detroit has been a leader in the nation as we think about great African Americans in even if they weren't from the Motor City, their presence here in the Motor City. Martin Luther King helps to deliver and speak for the first time elements of his I Have a Dream speech in 1963 in Detroit, with a march that culminates along Woodward South in a southerly fashion down to what was known at the time Cobo Hall. We are leaders, and when I think about, as I close, when I think about our history, I think about another gentleman who was here very often, really in Detroit, homeboy, brother Keith Owens. We are going through now saying goodbye to the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. Someone who was here quite often, Keith and Pam, as journalists, when I think about it, and particularly being a journalist at the beginning of the 1990s here in Detroit, Reverend Jackson was here so often that at least this young guy at the time took his work for granted. That he was here so often with Rainbow Push, Operation Push in the beginning. I want to close by hoping that we can share a few moments of silence to remember the great works of the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. Thank you so much. I'm excited about our program tonight. Again, my good friend Stacey Clayton, thank you for inviting me. It is always an honor to be in the house. I'm going to step to the back and call that 17-year-old and make sure he made it to his destination, which I think is about 5:30, would have been 5:30. If I step out, it is not because I'm not interested in the program, but I'm a little nervous. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Another hand for Kenny Coleman. Just a little over a month ago, we celebrated the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with a program entitled Women of the Movement Then and Now. It focused on Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, and Burley Evers Williams, the widows of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers. Also want to acknowledge John Ison. Don, are you in the room? Who's Don? Right now. We had the pleasure of giving Don an award during our birthday program. Tonight, we're going to widen that lens and to look and view Alberta King, the mother of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Louise Little, mother of Malcolm X, and Berta Baldwin, mother of James Baldwin. We will examine how these three women, their teachings, the resilience, and values to shape the lives and missions of their sons, and by extension, become the architects of Black legacy rather than footnotes to history. Dr. Malaika is a scholar, sociologist, motivational speaker, advocate, and New York Times bestselling author playing both the three mothers. She holds a PhD in sociology and a master's in multidisciplinary gender studies from the University of Cambridge, in addition to a bachelor's in anthropology from Stanford University. With an international upbringing in places like Sweden, Dubai, and Mexico, I'm not going to try to say the other one. Anna's research, writing, and talks are centered on gender and race issues in the U.S., especially as it relates to pervasive erasure of Black women. Anna has been featured in Time Magazine, New York Magazine, CNN, Motherly, Newsweek, The Guardian, and more. She's a highly sought-after speaker, and we're very fortunate to have her with us this evening. And as a side note, when I was Googling for images of Anna, the first one that came up was her on stage interviewing President Barack Obama for International Human Rights Day in 2024. Then I knew This evening, Anna will be interviewed by Donna Givens-Davidson. Donna is a native Detroit with a career span of more than 4 decades. She currently is the president and CEO of Eastside Community Network. A notable 2024 Black business leader, she brings both scholarly insight and lived leadership to her work. Donna also teaches a course on the city of Detroit at New York's Columbia University. Donna is a graduate of the University of Michigan School of Literature, Science, and Arts with a major in political science and minor in African American Studies. Tonight, she joins us in her capacity as co-host of the Authentically Detroit podcast. Through the podcast, Donna elevates thoughtful, justice-centered conversations in Detroit's history, culture, policy, and future. And hello to everyone who's watching us on the podcast this evening. I had the pleasure of having dinner with these wonderful women last night, and all I can say is you are in for a treat. Please join me in welcoming Malaika and Donna Givens-Davidson.
Keep the energy going.
See, testing, mine's working. How's yours?
It's working now. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I hope that you picked up a copy of the book. I was not aware of this book until I was asked to do this, and I got it. And I have to say, I thought I knew things, and then I read it, and I learned a whole lot. So I really want to start with this whole concept of movement, where movements come from. A lot of times when we find out about movements, we look at these smart people, usually men, and we think, wow, where did they get that from? Maybe it's their father. Maybe it's a mentor. Maybe it's their education. We know mothers are the first teacher, right? But a lot of times we look at mothers are teaching etiquette classes, and mothers are teaching you how to handle your anger, or teaching you to do your homework, or teaching you to be wise. You wrote about 3 Black women who are actually brilliant strategists who helped shape the thinking of these men. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And I would say all Black women are these brilliant thinkers. And I think that this book is, yes, a testament to these 3 particular Black women, and I'm going to tell you about how amazing they were. But it's also a love letter to all Black women. And I'll start with talking about Alberta Williams King. So she was born in Atlanta, Georgia. Her parents were the leaders of Ebenezer Baptist Church. We often been told in history that Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., that this was his church and he passed it on to his son, but that is actually not historically accurate. It was Alberta's parents, and she was really the daughter of Ebenezer Baptist Church. So she grows up believing, yes?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I want to make sure you get to one point, though.
I will. I'm going to get to that. Exactly. Do you have one you want me to get to?
No, yes.
If I don't get to it, please answer. So she grows up believing that her faith is always intertwined with social justice. So she grows up participating in marches and leading boycotts. Her and her parents are some of the first members of the NAACP. So she participates in nonviolent movements before she terms it that, or before her son does. So it's really as if I'm really describing the exact same person as her son. Her husband, when she met him and they fell in love, he was actually considered illiterate, and he talks about this in his autobiography. Alberta, on the other hand, had a bachelor's degree, a teaching certificate. Education was really important in their family, and they had certain privileges. And so they believed that didn't make them better than anyone else, but that they had a responsibility to do even more for our community. So when the future Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. at the time, his name's Michael King, he meets her, he falls in love with her. All of his friends made fun of him. Actually, he writes about this in his autobiography, because they say he was just a green country boy. How would it ever be possible that B. Alberta Williams would fall in love with him? To his luck, she did love him back, but she says to him, "You're not educated yet, and I want to help you get there." So all the men in her family went to Morehouse. All the women in her family went to Spelman. Before, Spelman was a high school, then it became a college, so her college degree was from Morris Brown, but she went to Spelman for high school. And it's not a coincidence that once she falls in love with him, he then also goes to to Morehouse, and then becomes the incredible orator that he was. But he even says he could not have done it without her. So we'll leave that there. There's a lot more discussion to make at what point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just really interesting. And I'm sorry to just get so excited about this. Her family was not excited about her marrying him.
They accepted him, but she was better off than he was.
She wanted her to continue her education.
They said that she couldn't get engaged unless she finished her education, because at the time there was a law called the marriage bar that if a woman got married, she could no longer pursue her career. So this was a law to obviously limit women, but particularly middle-class women. And when Alberta chose to get married, she would have to walk away from her career as a teacher. Yes, but there's so much in the book. We can't give all of it.
That was just an interesting thing to me, because I think a lot of times people think that the marriage is the ultimate goal. And this is a family that really saw her as something more than that. So it's not just that she was, married to him, she taught him, but also her parents really groomed her to be something great in herself. And society was not prepared for a great woman, right? The social justice laws. So then we also have some interesting stories about James Baldwin's mother. Well, let's get to her last. Let's talk about Louise Little first. Talk about her experience, because I learned some things about her that I did not expect to know. I thought I knew that she was married to a man who was very involved in the Arab movement, and that, she had suffered a tremendous loss when her husband was killed. But can you talk about who she was as a human being?
Absolutely. So she was born in Grenada in the late 1890s, early 1900s. There's not really clear information on when she was born. And I should say, because while we're on that note, that when I started this research, there was almost nothing out there about the women. I had this question. I just wanted to know who they were. I wasn't necessarily trying to prove that because they did something, their sons did something. That wasn't my hypothesis. I just had a question. Who were they? And so we only really knew the year that their sons were born. We maybe knew the year they got married. And then we knew the year that their sons passed away. So it was only the dates where they had a relationship to a man that we were documenting. So with Louise Little, it's estimated that her birthday was around 1897. She was born in Grenada, and she's heavily influenced by her grandparents, who were enslaved and they were able to fight for their freedom. So they were Nigerians. They find themselves in Grenada, and they teach her that you should always fight for your right to live freely. That it would be better to die fighting for your freedom than to live in captivity. So she grows up believing this. She's very well educated, multilingual, and she wants to join an international movement for Black lives. So she travels by boat from Grenada to Montreal, Canada, where she joins the Marcus Garvey movement. She is a secretary of the movement, meaning she writes for the movement, she keeps record of the movement, and she writes for the newspaper. So we have been told historically that Malcolm X became the activist he was because his father was an organizer, and that is partially true. We were not told that his parents met because they were both organizers. And they were both so incredibly brave that they were known by Marcus Garvey himself. They were strategically sent to cities in the Midwest in order to incite the revolutionary spirit of these different communities. So it was a strategy for them to be known by the KKK, for them to be known by the Black Legion. They're trying to anchor them. It's the reason why in the Spike Lee film we see the moments where the Klan comes to attack and they're attacking their house and they're burning it down. All of this was actually a part of the strategy. They were two of the most courageous Garveyites, and it's why they were sent together to organize in different regions. But there's a lot more to be said about movies as well.
There is. I mean, but it's just so amazing that we didn't know that. And then the third mother, and this one was probably the biggest surprise to me, is Bernice Baldwin. I just loved her. Can you talk about her?
Yes. So Bernice Baldwin was born in Deal Island, Maryland, and her life begins with tragedy, actually. So she was, in my research, I found her birth certificate as well as her mother's death certificate. And they have the same year and the same month. So that tells us that her mother passed away either in childbirth or childbirth complications. And James Baldwin had written at one point that Bernice called her sister her mother. So her sister Bela was her mother. So this was important even for my research because Bernice doesn't show up in the census data, but her sister does. And so in this moment of tragedy, she becomes somebody who is focused on how you find the light, no matter how dark things can get. How you find hope, no matter what tragedy you are going through. And she wants to help other people through the dark times in their lives. And the way that she helps them is through her writing. So she writes letters that she gives all of her loved ones, filled with lessons on how we confront the darkness in order to find the light. So the people that I was able to interview who knew her said that they looked forward to this every year because this letter was such a gift to them. There was even a principal of James Baldwin who wrote that she knew that he had inherited his writing talents from his mother, simply based off of the letters she would write to excuse his absences. And as a mother of three myself, I feel so much pressure now when I write letters and my child is sick. So they know that I'm a incredible writer. But this is one of the principals who understood that he had inherited it from her. So when James Baldwin becomes the famous writer, and he says that he is a witness to the power of light, and he uses his writing to be that witness, he didn't just come up with that. He's actually directly quoting his mother.
And that's, I mean, you know, does anybody write better than James Baldwin, right? Is there any greater writer? I want to talk about this too because can you talk about versus education?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I didn't know anything about these women. So I was using various different strategies to try to reconstruct stories that others had completely erased, and very strategically so. And I was able to talk to some of her family members, some of her children and her grandchildren. And I remember a call in particular with one of her daughters where I said, I'm sorry that I have to ask this in this way. I didn't make any assumptions. This is the early 1900s. I said, was she educated? And immediately she says, oh my goodness, my mother was the most brilliant woman in the world. She was so smart and such a brilliant writer. And so then I said, okay, I now need to really dig into Dale Island, this tiny, tiny island in Maryland, because there was only one school she could have possibly gone to, which was the only school that at the time colored students could go to. And that's where she received her education and took it from there. She wanted to pursue this dream of writing, so she participates in the Great Migration. She leaves Deal Island first, she goes to Philadelphia, and then she finds herself in New York City in the middle of the Harlem Renaissance.
I think those stories are so significant though, because a lot of times, as we reflect on our past, we don't always acknowledge the brilliance that's innate in people. We think that they have to be innate. You learn skills and you learn to sharpen them, and certainly I'm a fan of higher education, but the fact that these women, only one of the three went to college, and all of the three had brilliant sons who made a difference, really speaks to something that's just good in our people, good in our history, and I think it's important for us to call that out. I'm so fascinated by I want to talk about the erasure, but I'm so fascinated by your studies. The fact that you were able to piece this together, how long did it take you to actually find all this stuff out?
Yeah. And I should say back to that other point that although only one of them gets a college degree, we also can't take for granted that all three of them were very literate, wrote beautifully, had such power over language. Because in the early 1900s, we know the barriers and the attacks against Black education. So they all three were incredibly brilliant.
Well, absolutely. And I was acknowledging that. I was just saying that a lot of times right now, the mindset is, well, if you went to an Ivy League college, that means you're smart.
Right.
If you went to this certain high school, that means you're smart. In Detroit, there has been such an attack on public education that there's this assumption that kids coming out of Detroit public schools are not smart. And that's sort of this racist framing that puts on our intelligence that we have to go to certain places to get smart. These women brought it with them.
So the research for this book, I started with the first year of my PhD, but what ended up happening is that I sold this book while I was still a PhD candidate. And I say that because it kind of accelerated the process of research because I was now also going to be getting a book out into the world, and I'm so grateful for that, of course. So it took me about 3 years to put this book together. And, you know, these kinds of books can take years and years and years, but the way that I put it together, so there were 2 books that I was really inspired by. One was Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly, which of course went on to become this incredible film, and The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And I went to my PhD advisor and I said, these are the 2 books that I'm inspired by. I'm going to write about these 3 women in particular. And she said, I love the idea. However, the research that was done for those 2 books, they were able to interview them. They were alive, the subjects of both books. So how are you going to do this? And I said, okay, I'm going to find it step by step. So the first step was to look at everything that the sons had written or said. So any speeches, any books. And I would pull any information that they mentioned about their mothers. Then I went to any research that had been done about the sons. Luckily, there's a lot written about the sons. And I reached out to any of the scholars who were still alive to see if they were willing to share any data they have, any archives, any letters where the mothers were spoken about. Interestingly enough, several of them did have letters and did have information on the mothers, but they said nobody had ever asked to see it. So one of the things that comes up, so I'll just pause here for a second, is with Louise Little. As I mentioned, there was very little about her. We had been told that she had quote unquote gone crazy. This was how she was described, and that she was institutionalized, and that this was the reason that her children were taken from her. In one of the boxes of all of the letters that I was going through, there was a note by a doctor, a white male doctor, where he is diagnosing Louise after her husband is murdered. And the letter says that Louise is claiming to be discriminated against. So one of the reasons that he cites that she's experiencing what they called at the time dementia praecox, which we would now call schizophrenia. One of the reasons he cites, there are a couple others, but one of them is that she's claiming to be discriminated against. So he's saying that she's imagining racism. And this is enough of a reason to put her in an institution against her will for 25 years of her life. But I already also told you that she was a radical activist. So the way that the family interprets this is as an incarceration of an activist. But we had just been told in history that she had gone crazy. So this is one of the letters that I find in all the things I'm sifting through. Then, after I looked at the letters, I was calling local historians in each of the places where the women lived, trying to get a better understanding of the local history, trying to find birth certificates, death certificates, land deeds, in case any of their family members owned land. I mentioned with James Baldwin mentioning that his mother called her sister her mother, Beulah. I couldn't find births in the census data, but then I could start to track Beulah. Beulah owned property, so I was also able to track that. I was able to track that her father, Bert's father, was remarried because I found a marriage certificate. I also see that he sells a house at one point and he moves away. So this is all of the ways in which I'm putting them together. I then was able to reach out to some of the family members. So I wanted that to be one of my last steps, because when you think about this, at the time, I wasn't on like a test, 2-time New York Times bestselling author. I was a PhD candidate, I was a student. So to be reaching out to 3 of the most studied families in world history, I had to come prepared. And so I was able to say, hey, there are some things that I have already found that you might be interested in, and I really want to just honor these women. And think about it in your own lives. If someone came to you and said, I would really like to write about this person in your life, and maybe came to you and your siblings or you and your cousins, you're going to have different reactions. One of you might say, yes, absolutely, I really want to tell you the story. And the other might say, who are you? Absolutely not. I'm not going to talk to you at all. And those were the different reactions that I received. Some of them were very excited that someone was finally going to tell the story of the matriarch of the family who made it all possible, and others felt reservations. These families have really confronted scholars, journalists, who have taken advantage of their willingness to share. if we think about how every single year there's this new rumor that some scandal is going to come out about the men, and we completely dehumanize them. We forget that this is very recent history. Their children are alive. These were family members who had had to experience the tragedy of their loved one being murdered in 2 cases. And so I knew I was going to have to approach that with such care, and that if they were going to trust me, I had a huge responsibility to do them proud. And so I was very fortunate that many of them were willing to speak with me, and if they weren't, they referred me to like family historians or their archival teams, the King Center, etc. And that's how I eventually put it all together.
Well, I have to believe it's also the way you approach them as a historian, right? Because you went there with respect, obviously. And you did not just come to extract, you brought them something as well. And I know that's got to be uplifting for the families to just even learn more about them. I felt reading this that you gave these women to me, and you gave them to me in Black History Month. Sometimes in Black History Month, we're just looking for other women. It's like everything is very male-centered. And so to really look at these women is beautiful. I remember when a former professor here, Dr. Daniel McGuire, wrote a book about Rosa Parks. And I felt like she gave Rosa Parks to me because I was able to read about her as more than just somebody who refused to stand up. About her scholarship, read about her find out who she is. It's so important for us to do that because that's what erasure looks like. Is we become flat, we become one thing in history, and nobody knows anything else. We're not interested. Yeah. To some extent, we don't even have flaws. We're just like the good woman, right? There's so many men are looking for some of us to be good women like they used to make them, right? But you know, I want to talk about erasure because your second book is erasure. And you hinted at this earlier that this is not accidental, that we cannot find documentation of who these women are and what they accomplished. Can you talk about erasure and how that intersects with your research here?
Absolutely. So when people read The Three Mothers, they often feel very shocked that we didn't know these stories. All 3 of these men are very well studied, and that's a beautiful thing. When I'm talking about the mothers, it's never to erase the sons. It's not to erase the fathers either. They're also really important stories. But we know the stories of the fathers, actually, right? We've heard that Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. was this incredible man, and that is true. We've heard that Malcolm X's father was an activist. We've even heard about James Baldwin's terrible stepfather, even though he wasn't great. We've heard of him. We know more about him than we know about the woman who loved him and supported his dreams and passed that dream on to him. So everybody who reads the book feels this sense of, how did this happen? How is it possible, after all the books that have been written about this men, it took in 2021 for a PhD candidate to tell us that they were walking in the footsteps of their mothers? And when I received that question throughout the whole book tour for The Three Mothers, I kept feeling this call. I have to really explain why Black women are so erased in this nation. Why we have been shown as the foil to something very particular in the US, which is American patriarchy. And as was mentioned in my bio, I traveled most of my life. I spent my life in Dubai, Estonia, Sweden, Mexico. Azerbaijan was the one that Stacey didn't want to say, Azerbaijan. And I was always very aware that the US likes to comment on how every other country was doing things wrong, but we don't really think about ourselves very often in that critique, and especially when it comes to patriarchy. And patriarchy exists all over the world, but each nation has its own version of patriarchy. So in Erased, my second book that came out in May last year, I talk about what American patriarchy is and how this nation was built. I talk about how when the founding fathers won the Revolutionary War, they were the underdogs. Nobody was expecting this to happen. And so they actually become very afraid. They have a lot of insecurity at the beginning because they've also been oppressing other people. Other people who may now have this same revolutionary spirit. Other people who had to fight to help them to win. People who they were enslaving, even women who they were married to, their daughters. And so they designed the Constitution after Shays' Rebellion, because they were very afraid after Shays' Rebellion, because they couldn't quell that rebellion as fast as they wanted to, that they need to keep things in their hands, power in their hands. So in the Constitution, they define who gets to have power in the United States. They say that it's white men who get to own land, who are going to get to vote. They use the word persons, but we're aware that that's not who they were considering. One, because they have clauses to protect the institution of slavery in the Constitution, so clearly they're not including people who are enslaved. They also tell their wives and daughters directly, you are not to participate politically in this nation. They tell us that men are the ones who pass on their legacy and their status, and that the white women in their lives are solely supposed to reproduce their power through children. That that's their only obligation. So we know that they're setting up this system where they're going to oppress women, they're building a republic of men, but they're also not including Black women, Black men. They're not including Indigenous people. They're not including immigrants from that point forward. And really, the entire history of our nation can be summarized by this. That you either are a part of the group of people who wanted to maintain that original social order, and you were calling that democracy, even though it was not, or you were part of a group of people who were never included in the benefits of American patriarchy, so you always pushed for more. The group has been most known for doing that is Black women. Because we were told, yes, we can clap for that, absolutely. We, Black women, were told historically, by law, we were the only ones who were told that our children were not human beings, but that they were somebody else's property. By law, we were told that. And when a mother is told that by law, she's not going to accept it. She's going to know that this is made up, and we have to make up a new system. We have to see beyond what we're being offered. If we were told that legacy and status is passed down by the man, then why is it in the United States, no matter how a Black woman came to have children, that child would always carry her status? So it was told to us that Black women were the antithesis of power in the United States. But what they didn't realize when they pushed us out of the system was that it gave us the vision of how made up it was, how fragile it was. It gave us even more power, because we don't exist in the confines of a system that doesn't include us. We have always seen beyond it, and that's why we have pushed this nation to see things through our eyes. So this is the reason Black women are constantly erased, constantly degraded, constantly spoken about as a monolith, as you mentioned, where we're not given the nuances of our humanity. But that has never stopped us. And so whenever people say, oh, we're not ready for this, we're not ready for a Black woman to do this, we've never waited for the nation to do it. We have always said,
that brings me to another point. Because a lot of times, because of that, as women pursue positions of power, a lot of times we're encouraged to behave and to take on characteristics of men so we can be accepted. Without understanding that it's our womanly qualities, I don't want to say feminine because that kind of puts us in a box, but our qualities as women are the qualities that equip us to lead. That we were leading things and we don't have to put on this, mask of a man in order to lead. Can you talk about that in the movement? Because I've seen it happen politically where people are running for office or people are doing things and all of a sudden they are, being very masculine. Yeah.
Well, this happens because, and I should say too, my approach to talking about patriarchy is definitely never anti-men by any means. My discussion of it is very centered on the founding fathers and what was going on with them and why they constructed the nation this way and how it hurt all of us as a result. But one of the things that's happening is when we present as a nation saying only some people are going to have access to humanity, really. Only some people are going to get to vote, only some people are going to get to own land. And the only other group we acknowledge is white women because they are going to reproduce our power through children. And you only see two groups recognized really by the Constitution in that way. Every other person is told your path to humanity here is to assimilate to the two acknowledged groups. So this two acknowledged groups we're seeing obviously is a very limited gender binary, but it is also always tied to whiteness. So everybody else is told to fight for their right to be gendered by a white definition. And so that's also where respectability politics comes in, where many of us believe as long as I play the role, maybe I too will be acknowledged here. So then you have a whole nation of people who are not being served by the system, but they are protecting the system with their might, with everything they have. They don't even realize why they're doing it, but it's because they think that the path to humanity is to ascend a made-up ladder. It's why Black women have been able to see it most clearly, because we had no access to that in any way. It was not that we were white, it was not that we were man. And so we were able to see, we need to let that go. And one of the reminders for all of us is to, one, stop assimilating to the system, and to continue to build our own systems, especially for political candidates who want to get elected. And the way I speak about this is really, I call it the Stacey Abrams method. Because Stacey Abrams was able to turn Georgia into a swing state, not by trying to assimilate to the system as it existed, but by saying, I'm going to get people to the polls. I'm not going to tell them how to vote. I just want to hear what they have to say. And that's how we move closer to an actual democracy, because democracy tells us that power is vested in the people, all of the people in a nation. So we haven't yet experienced true democracy in the United States because there's always been barriers to certain groups participating. So what we're actually trying to build, what Stacey Abrams showed us, is a completely new system we haven't yet seen, where we get to hear everybody's voices.
You know, Detroit just elected our first Black woman mayor. And that delay was not caused by the founding fathers, right? That delay was caused by the way that we perpetuate those politics right now. When Paula Giddings wrote in her book, Where I Enter, about women in our society, what she talked about is that Black women are at the forefront of the women's rights movement and the forefront of the civil rights movement, and yet we keep getting pushed down and pushed back by Black men and white women. And I think it's important for us to be accountable and to acknowledge the way that beyond respectability politics, we are internalizing patriarchy in so much of what we do, and not just men, but other Black women sometimes perpetuating these things like, I don't know if this person is strong enough, or I don't know if this person is smart enough. The kinds of things when I was listening to some of the criticisms of our current mayor, where people are saying she's not smart. And it was upsetting to me. You don't even have to like her to say she's obviously intelligent. But to have to prove that you're intelligent. They did the same thing to Kamala Harris. I don't know if you remember that hearing. People say she's the least intelligent person to ever run. How do we, as a people, hold ourselves accountable for doing things differently and not falling into those traps that end up oppressing all of us?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I will say, overall, Black women, Black people are always doing this nation. Overall, we're doing really well. I have to say that. Are there ways in which we can improve? Yes. Yes, we have to stop assimilating. Yes, we have to stop internalizing the patriarchy of this notion of who gets to be powerful and who the leaders are supposed to be. And it happens all the time. It's not only in politics, right? We are constantly, even in my own experience, people told me growing up, oh, you need to lower your voice, or you need to work a certain way in order for us to take you seriously, blah, blah, blah. And in my opinion, it's I don't need to change myself. You're going to change your opinion if it gets to be powerful. So that is kind of our approach. We have to shift our notion of who's going to be the leaders. And so even when we're talking about the three mothers, the reason that they were erased, it wasn't necessarily because the sons erased them. In my research, I found the sons giving them shout-outs all the time. Malcolm X wrote in a letter that he was not first introduced to this activism through Elijah Muhammad, but that instead his mother was the first to introduce him to this. He says that in a letter, but nobody ever published it. Then we have MLK Jr. constantly talking about how he would go to his mother for counsel, to his mother for advice. He was very close to his maternal grandmother, even. So he's not the one erasing them either.
Sons acknowledge their mothers.
Yeah.
Did he ever acknowledge Coretta's contribution to his scholarship?
Yeah.
No, I think sons acknowledge their mothers, but then their wives don't always get the same kind of credit. Somebody raised this to me, I'm mentioning this yesterday, one of my daughters raised this to me. She said, there's no way that she did not influence, Coretta Scott King did not influence his thinking. She did not influence his politics. And I never thought about that before. That you're married to somebody and you talk to them all the time, you're their thought partner, you're helping them strategize, you're helping them understand, and yet you aren't necessarily brilliant. You haven't even given them some lines they use in speech, you know what I mean? Because we, as you pointed out, we are brilliant. It's not intentional. I think, the other thing sometimes is that because of this power vacuum, because of oppression, sometimes it happens that you can find this competition for who's going to be least oppressed. And some of us refer to that as misogynoir. This idea that we get a special level of oppression that just happens, that comes internally and externally. So I don't want to attack, and I'm definitely not anti-male, I'm anti-patriarchy. And the way it shows up in our communities. And I think it's important for us to understand that that we have so much brilliance that gets ignored, and people, I don't know anything about Coretta Scott King. I missed the program. I should have come so I learned about her. I don't know anything about Dr. Betty Schwartz, other than she is Dr. Betty Schwartz, and therefore we know that she's brilliant. But I can't quote a single thing that she said. And it's that kind of erasure that continues, and your books are actually challenging us to stop.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. Yes. And what I was getting to is that the way it plays out is often in the stories we reproduce that we say this is the leader. So, for example, any of those scholars who heard the sons talk about their mother, they then still left that out of our telling of history. So if James Baldwin said, ask my mother, she knows more about this than I do, and he actually did say that, then the person who was interviewing him then takes that out and decides to tell a different story. So this is also the way we often reproduce it, is if we're hearing something that counters what patriarchy has told us about power, we still are filtering it through that mentality, so then we tell the story differently. And the way that this happens, I say things like, this mother or this wife was so happy to be in the background. She was so happy to support. And that's probably not true. We're now putting it through this lens where we think that's normal because that's what we're used to. So even in my own personal experience, so my husband, he's running for Lieutenant Governor of California right now. He's wonderful. But we're college sweethearts. I'm going to tell you a bit of a personal story about how erasure has shown up in my own life. He ran for city council when I was 19. He was 21. He won, which was very exciting. He then became the mayor of Stockton, California. He was the youngest mayor of a major city in American history, first Black mayor of Stockton. There was a lot of attention on him, a lot of eyes on us. And I was quickly having to see how what I was studying was playing out in my own life, where very quickly we went from being two Stanford grads into people saying directly to me, he's the brain, you're the beauty. Wow. Or, thank you for being the woman behind the great man. People loved saying this to me. What they didn't know is I am who I am, and I'm going to respond. And I said, I am not standing behind him. Please don't put that in the history books. We are collaborating, we are partners. I'm right beside him. I have my own dreams, I have my own path. But I could see it playing out in real time, where if a journalists came to interview him, and they would say, who are major influences in your life? And it happens to this day. He will always say it was his mother, his grandmother, his auntie who raised him, his three mothers, he calls them, and now a Black woman who he's married.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you. But when the article comes out, and I am telling you, I have seen him give the answer, and then I see the article comes out, and it always references his father, who sadly, as a massive person in our nation, has not been a part of his life. But they still want to talk about him, rather than the Black woman who my husband named, and I've heard him do it. So we constantly, especially anybody who's a writer in this room, scholars in this room, we have to really think about how we've internalized this notion of who gets to be influential in our stories, because we're really missing what people are saying all the time, all the time.
We're working on some other books now. And one of them is really fascinating to me. Who you talking about? Yes. Oh, the fiction book. The fiction book, because I've never thought of this before. Tell me about your fiction book.
Okay, this will be my first time to speak about it publicly, but let's just stay in the room. My fiction, I'm working on a novel right now. I am also working on my next nonfiction. But my novel is exploring the stories of the mothers of Disney princesses who die at the beginning of films and who we've never told the stories of. Thank you. And I'm applying what I do with the three mothers in a fictional way. I have three kids. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And my daughter loves the Disney princess movies, and we were watching The Little Mermaid, the newest one, of course, Black Little Mermaid. And my son said to me afterward, and I think this is a testament, he must hear me talk about these things all the time, but he said, "Where is her mom?" And I said, "Yes, such a question. I'm going to write about her." So yeah, I'm writing about, I won't tell you which ones yet, but I'm very excited. Yeah, this could be my first one.
It's interesting when you talk about culture. We've all seen the Disney movies. I mean, those of us who are parents saw them over and over and over again, these motherless children. It's as though, and the father's always important. And so it is, there's nothing.
There's like so many of them. There's like 8 of them that don't have their mom. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. Jasmine does it, Belle, Cinderella, Ariel. A lot of people reference Bambi when I tell them the story. Bambi's not in my book, but also Bambi, yeah.
So
There's dying all over the place in Disney, yeah.
So I think it's foundational. And I think that when we look at the foundational, when you put things in pictures, sometimes it makes people read that, which people who won't read about the three mothers will read that, and people will read the three mothers next. You're also reading another book. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the other book that I'm working on, my next nonfiction. So Erased was a part of a 2-book deal, so I'm very fortunate. I knew there was going to be another nonfiction after. And it really relates to everything we're seeing right now, particularly around ICE, but definitely this entire administration. But a lot of people saying, this is the worst it's ever been. We're so scared. What are we going to do? And I get it. I'm not minimizing how horrible this is. It really is horrific. Don't get me wrong. But to say this is the worst it's ever been in the United States of America, that's... I can't really accept that. Especially having written a book about the mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin, who lived through 2 world wars, who lived through Jim Crow, who lived through the Great Depression, had their children during the Great Depression, who saw lynchings often, who have their own civil rights movement, and then inspire their children to lead a civil rights movement. 2 of their sons are murdered. Then they live long enough, however, 2 of them live long enough to see the first episodes of the Oprah Winfrey Show. I mean, what they saw in their lifetime, and I study this, for me to say this is the worst it's ever been in the United States as a Black woman is crazy. But there's a lot of people saying this.
It's brainwashing, right?
But definitely, it's a result of the attacks on our education, 100%. The books that are being banned, all this happens when we attack our understanding of history. You have people in 2026 saying, what do we do? As if this country has been a country of freedom. So anyways, I've been hearing this, and at the same time, I also have an incredible privilege where I work with a group of women who were formerly incarcerated. It's called the Young Women's Freedom Center. And they are so grounded, and they are really leading such movements of freedom. And so it's this constant contrast where I'm hearing people talk about how this is so horrific and they've never seen it before, versus women who were incarcerated as girls, who are aware that our country does these kinds of things. And so the book is about recognizing, number one, strategies of oppression that are being recycled right now. And number two, using the stories of these incredible women as the strategies of resistance for us to learn from. So that's my nonfiction. It's supposed to come out next year, but I haven't quite started yet. But yeah.
But you've done the research.
I've done the research.
I'm really excited to read that. One of my pet peeves is, this is not America. Like, who's America?
It is. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, I saw Stacey going by my Okay. Okay. Orange is the New Black.
Oh, interesting.
Tell me how that relates to your writing.
Yeah, I would say so that show, in some ways, it did start a conversation that many people were ignoring, right, around women who had experienced incarceration in our country. But that story is so much about how they became incarcerated. And the women who I work with and learn from every day, these are the stories of how they fought for their freedom and how they are the ones who messed up, but that our nation failed them. And it's a perfect extension from Erased, where I'm talking about American patriarchy, because the results of American patriarchy are that if you stand up to that system, you will be punished for doing so. So especially in the case of women who are incarcerated, often they were acting in self-defense. They were providing for their children. They experienced horrific abuse, and then they were punished for it. If a woman is found being trafficked, she's put in prison. How does that make any sense? But in American patriarchy, it makes complete sense. And so that's how it's related, and so it's kind of turning Orange is the New Black on its head and saying, let's talk about how they are leaders for liberation that we all need to learn from.
Those women did not belong there.
Yeah.
They were unfairly incarcerated. I mean, there are so many cases that we can think of where women defend their lives and then go to prison for defending so many women in prison for that purpose.
But I would even say that women who have to steal to provide, that's the result of a system that is unjust, so our nation generally is horrific when it comes to mass incarceration, we know this, but women have often been forgotten in this story, and I'm inspired by them every day, and I'm excited to share many of their stories with my audiences, yeah.
Thank you very much. This has been amazing. Welcome to Detroit. I hope this is not the last time you come back. Come back to your husband and his governor campaign. He's looking out at the sun of LA. I'm telling you, go over tubs, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Do you have time for questions from the audience?
Yes, please.
Any questions? We have time for 3. We'll start here. Any questions? My name is Dawn Givens-Davidson. Thank you so much for being here. I had a few moments to speak to you, let you know that I started the book. I didn't finish it yet, but I'm so encouraged now to read it even more. And I wondered, you're a mother of 3, and after studying these, in any way in which you learned about them, informed you on how you will raise your kids and anything intentional that you might do to help shape some brilliant leaders, which I know they're already brilliant, but anything that you learned that will inform you as a mother.
Thank you, I love that question. So I should say when I started writing the book, I was not a mother yet. I just always felt that mothers deserve to be honored. Maybe my own mom really drilled that in. So while I was writing the book and the dissertation, I was expecting my firstborn. And then the book really took this very personal turn for me, where it felt in many ways like Alberta and Louise were guiding me through motherhood, because my first reaction to finding out that my husband and I were expecting that I was pregnant, I was so excited, so overjoyed. But I'm also very aware of the attacks on Black mothers. And I'm very aware of the Black maternal health crisis. The maternal health crisis generally in the United States is bad for everybody, and it's disproportionately affecting Black women. And so then the fear really kind of took over. And it felt as if the three of them, by me discovering their stories with every piece of information that I was finding as I'm feeling my baby kick inside of me, was like them giving me a map that explained, yes, some of this is going to be very difficult, but don't let that rob you of your joy and the magic of what you're doing. And that because of the nature of how Black motherhood has been treated in the United States, we see our mothering very differently than even how a lot of white feminist scholars write about it. We see it as the way Jude Jordan talks about how when a child is born, the world begins again. And so when we're building this new world, when our children are born, we're ushering new worlds in constantly. And that's so revolutionary and so beautiful. And so the three of the women that I write about in the book are very different from each other. And that was very important for me to really emphasize because of the way in which Black women are so often represented as a monolith, like we talked about. But there are also ways in which they did intersect. And there are these tenets of Black motherhood that I felt at the end of writing the book that all of them symbolize. So number one is that Black mothers don't really have a choice as to whether or not we're going to tell our children about how ugly the world can be. At some point, we're going to have to prepare them. Other people might have that privilege, but we don't. But they all three made sure that their children were not defined by that. So they tell them, the world can be a little ugly, but don't let that define you. And they tell them to not allow other people's myopic visions of them limit them. But instead that they have an obligation to live freely, to find joy, to find love. And they show their children how to resist. They teach them how they resisted in their own lives, and they pass those skills on to them. They also teach them that they're not alone in this, and that they have peers to guide them. And that ultimately, I always say this, that all three of them, they were not thinking of how do I make my child a civil rights icon. That's not what their goal was. They were simply teaching them how to keep dreaming in a nation that was going to tell them that they couldn't. How to keep living in a nation that was going to tell them they weren't worthy of that. And if they could accomplish that, no matter what it was waged against, if their children could remember to dream and to live, that they had done what they needed to do. And I keep that in my heart every day with my kids.
Any other questions?
Hello, everyone. First, I just want to thank you for the amazing talk. And I guess I'll start with a little introduction. So my name is Desiree. I'm actually a fourth-year medical student at Wayne State. And the question I have for you, I'm going to ask not just for myself, but for other young Black women that want to step into leadership roles within their fields. But I'll use myself as a framework for kind of a question in itself. But for me personally, as someone that wants to be able to change the narrative, push for Black women in medicine, and be a change maker for the types of conversations that are being had, and step into leadership roles within specifically academic surgery, which is like where my interests lie, what advice would you give to a young person with regards to holding on to their ideologies, staying sure of themselves in these spaces that aren't really built for us, and being a trailblazer for progress? And just further educating ourselves to be able to navigate these spaces that, like I kind of said previously, weren't really built for us in the first place.
Wow, such a good question, and I have so many experiences with that so much is coming to mind, all these memories of navigating these spaces. And definitely, of course, having gone to Stanford, having gone to University of Cambridge, even wider than Stanford, but also not really known fact is that I'm the youngest Black woman to ever make it on the New York Times bestseller list in the category of nonfiction. And it's because Black women are so often pushed out of the degrees that are required to do nonfiction kind of research. So all of that to say, it is so important to know what you are coming into the institution for, because there will be all these voices trying to tell you what you're supposed to be doing there, that are going to try to tell you to assimilate in a lot of ways, that are going to try to tell you, hey, this is how things work here, and that are also going to try to tell you that you're just lucky to be there, right? That we should just be grateful to be there, so let's just fall in line, let's not disrupt, let's not challenge, let me just say thank you, put my head down. And so when you're aware of that going into it, anytime those moments pop up, you just say, ooh, I see it. And now is when I'm really going to stand up and have something to say, because it's constant. And so we have to reframe it in our mind and say, actually, they're really lucky to have me here. You're welcome that I'm here. I have opinions to share with you. And we need to be shifting these systems from the inside of them as well. And so I always see myself that way, that there's a reason I'm there, and there's a reason that I'm getting certain tools from these institutions whose founders would be rolling over in their grave knowing that I got a degree from there. And that I'm going to take that skill out into the world and do something that matters for my community. So I always knew that getting my degree from Stanford, it wasn't for Stanford, and it wasn't only for me. It was so that anything that came out of my mouth and people respect the title of Stanford, respect the title of Cambridge, and respect the New York Times bestseller list, that they would be hearing the stories of Black women. Yeah. I'm excited to see all the things that you accomplish. I'm so excited for all the work that you're going to produce in this world. Thank you.
I told you all you were going to be in for a treat, didn't I? Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Donna, so much. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you to all of our volunteers for this evening. Thank you to Full Course Catering. Thank you to Source Bookstore for the books. Thank you to the staff here at the Industry Innovation Center. And thank you all for being here tonight. And as a little treat, we have a little bit of pie out for you. From Soul Amazing, Linda Cummings is Wayne State as well. So thank you all for being here. And keep looking out. Because 2 weeks from tonight, March 10th, we're going to do our Women's History Month program here, and it's going to feature 5 women leaders in the Sheffield administration who are also Wayne State alums. So keep a lookout for you for that.